Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is December 28th, 2023, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? Again, a huge thank you to all of you who came to my live stream on December 26th. It was really fun, and hopefully for next year, I will be doing more of these live streams. And we had some good discussions as well about what happened in Crimea, basically with the sinking and the destruction of the Novocherkassk landing ship in Feodosia, which is a very big ship that the Russians have lost. So it was a fun discussion. Thank you for being there. But now I want to do a map update because there's a lot of things that happened in the last week on the Eastern Front, on the Southern Front that we need to discuss. So we will talk about map changes. First, let's go to Avdiivka. What I can tell you in Avdiivka is that so far in the last week, my last update was on Friday, so last Friday, there haven't been any changes in terms of Russian gains, which is excellent news. Again, the Russians are heavily pushing in the north of Avdiivka, in the Krasnohorivka area, and also in the south. And in the north is where they're really concentrating their push. One push towards Ocheretine and Keramik, so these two villages up north, they're trying to take control over this important railway juncture that then leads into Avdiivka and Stepove. And additionally, the Russians are trying to go inside of Stepove. For the last few weeks, they've been trying to take this small little village without any real success. The Ukrainians are operating a lot of first-person view drones and also Bradleys, the American Bradleys, which Ukraine desperately needs more of, which have been effective at destroying these Russians that are hiding in these small posadkas. And the 25mm cannon, if I remember correctly, that the Bradley uses, and different variants of ammunition have been very effective at just obliterating the Russian infantrymen trying to push through here. So overall, the situation in the north is being controlled by the Ukrainian forces, but as I've repeated myself multiple times, the Russians will not stop in Avdiivka. They will push no matter what because their Tsar told them to. And so in the south is where the Russians are not seeing as much success. So the south of Avdiivka, again, I feel like we're looking always at the same type of map here in the south. So the Russians are trying to push towards Severne and Tonyanke, but so far, again, they're just fighting in the fields that are further away from these two villages. So the situation is stable in Avdiivka. For the past week, the Ukrainians have been able to hold the line. But again, I want to be realistic with you guys in the sense that the Russians, knowing that they're persistent, it is very possible that in 2024, the Ukrainian army might pull out of Avdiivka if they deem it to be necessary and not worthy anymore of holding the line. Remember that Avdiivka, as city proper, is no longer exists. The buildings are shattered. It's just ruins. Also, considering that the Ukrainians, I think they have found another black hole that sucks in Russian resources. They're trying to really make it as costly as possible for the Russians. And so it could be very possible that in 2024, the Ukrainians might give up on Avdiivka. But right now, they see the point in continuing on defending Avdiivka because it's a very for the Russians, symbolic city, and they're going to throw everything possible. So we'll see what happens next year. Some less good news as well. If we're looking down south of Donetsk and Avdiivka, Marinka is officially under Russian control. That is no surprise. I've actually mentioned that, I believe, 2 weeks ago when we looked down at Marinka, that the Ukrainians would most likely pull out of the city. Again, this is a city of 9,000 people prior to the full-scale war in 2014. So I've shared with you guys as well some images of this city last fall in 2022. And this city was also completely ruined. There's no building standing anymore in this city. So, the Russians are spinning this as a Berlin 1945 type of victory, but truly there's nothing to be proud of. And one of their journalists, one of their propagandists that went a few days ago to film Marinka said that they were proud that there's nobody in there, there's no human being, there's no buildings left, but Marinka is Russian, right? This is what matters. And again, this is what Russia is all about. They cannot take cities intact, right? Of course, there's going to be some level of destruction, but in every single Russian campaign, modern campaign, they have absolutely obliterated the cities that they have taken. Mariupol, look at Grozny in Chechnya and all the other cities in Chechnya back in the 90s that the Russians destroyed. And now Ukraine, right? And even during the 2008 war with Georgia, the Russians conducted the same type of operations, destroying everything, and then moving in. So again, there's nothing to be proud about here for the Russians, especially when we're considering that this line here is the 2014 to 2022 line. All right, so the Russians fought almost 10 years in this area to take a city of less than 9,000 people. So I think that Zaluzhny confirmed this, and he said that it just made no sense for the Ukrainian force to hold on to ruins, and so they've moved out further away, but they're still going to hold positions close to Marinka. So overall, there's nothing really critical in the loss of Marinka, but it is still unfortunate nonetheless that Ukraine loses some of its best men and some of its most amazing cities and small villages to this Russian horde. So that's the situation in the Donetsk Avdiivka area. Now, the other one where the Russians have renewed another offensive that the Russians have renewed is in Bakhmut. The situation is very difficult right now, I would say, in the south and the north of Bakhmut. You can see that the Russians have essentially reversed a lot of these Ukrainian gains back in the summer campaign. You can see that they have taken positions in Hromove. They're now pushing towards Bogdanivka. Again, the main goal in the north of Bakhmut is to get as close as possible to Chasiv Yar, because Chasiv Yar is a critical staging area for the Ukrainians that are currently defending Bakhmut and also conducting offensive operations were conducting offensive operations in Bakhmut. And also the Russians are pushing around Klishivka. You can see that they're awfully close to the village of Klishivka, and these were two villages that the Ukrainians captured, liberated back a few months ago in the summer. Avdiivka and Klishivka, which are very important for the Ukrainians to hold on to. This gives them heights, this gives them proximity to Bakhmut as well. So the Russians have also renewed their campaign here to try to reverse these Ukrainian gains. So I'll keep you guys updated, but so far the situation isn't looking that good for the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Now, if we're looking at the north of Bakhmut, so that is between Lysychansk all the way up to Kupiansk, the situation is relatively the same. Nothing has changed here. The Russians have been conducting offensives here for the last, almost, since the springtime of this year. So overall, the line is relatively the same. Nothing has changed, but of course you can expect the Russians actually had an offensive, I believe, yesterday, and it was recorded by the Ukrainian forces. Again, another wave of armored vehicles that were absolutely obliterated, a few BMPs, and I think a few T-72s that the Russians threw in a single column around Sinkivka. So right now the Russians are trying to capture this small little town of Sinkivka, and they've lost a lot of vehicles the last few weeks here because they've conducted a lot of suicidal operations, but that's just the tactic the Russians are applying in every single front line right now. But the front line here in the north of Kupiansk has not changed, which is excellent. So the Ukrainians are holding really strong in the north especially. But I would say the three most critical areas right now is Bakhmut. With the new renewed operation, you can see the amount of forces that the Russians have moved in Bakhmut. Some say that it could be almost 80,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers, that are present in this salient, this massive area of Bakhmut. So that includes Soledar, Bakhmut, in the south of Kurdyumivka, Avdiivka, Klishivka. So a lot of Russian forces are present here. So that's what allowed them to renew this offensive. And also, of course, Avdiivka in the south of Donetsk, the Russians have equally the same amount of forces, most likely about 50 to 80,000 soldiers, very close to Avdiivka. So this makes life very difficult for the Ukrainian defenders in Avdiivka. And the last one is the Russians did a counteroffensive, now are doing a counteroffensive in the Orikhiv direction. So this was, if you guys remember, the main offensive for the Ukrainians, and now the Russians have also concentrated a lot of troops here, and they have reversed some of the Ukrainian gains around Robotine. You can see that essentially the Ukrainians are still holding most of the villages that they managed to capture back in the summer, but the very worrisome news that I've been reading the last few days is that the Russians are using chemical weapons in this direction, especially because they're trying to drive out the Ukrainians out of these well dug in defensive positions that the Ukrainians also have here. So they've started utilizing chemical weapons. Now, this is not a first. The Russians have conducted multiple offensives and have used chemical weapons in the past, but the Ukrainians are saying that the severity and the quantity of its usage in this specific direction has increased quite a bit. So it's worrisome, but you can't expect, cheaters to not cheat. And that's what Russia's doing. They will manipulate, they will cheat, they will always apply the, nasty tactics to be able to win, right? And that's what war is all about. It's not about being fair. So, again, the international community is worried, but Ukraine needs help right now. To drive out these Russians, Ukraine needs more Bradleys. Ukraine needs more long-range missiles. Ukraine needs a lot more of a lot of things. And again, especially from the United States, it's very worrisome to see that there isn't that commitment from the government, not only Biden, but the Congress not agreeing to send this massive, aid package to Ukraine, which is still being on hold right now. So it's worrisome. So unfortunately, the situation also in Robotin and Orikhiv, the Orikhiv direction, has worsened for the Ukrainians. So you can see again, the same theme is running this week. The Russians have the momentum, and I think that this is going to be the case for the next few months. I hope that the F-16s, which will come most likely in the next few months, will really help the Ukrainians start massively bombing the Russian positions on the front line and degrading their logistics as well. It's not just about the front line, but also destroying their bases that are deep in the rear, whether it be in Berdyansk and Mariupol or even in Russia. There needs to be a green light to also hit Russian military targets in Russia to start degrading their bases, their command centers, their logistics, and also pulverize the bridge between Kerch and Russia. This is a must. And as I've said in my live stream a few days ago, this is one of the main goals that I want to see be achieved by the Ukrainian forces, is to destroy and obliterate this bridge completely. This will degrade the Russians in the south. It will not stop them from moving, and transporting supplies and men from mainland Russia, mostly from Rostov, Taganrog, and other cities that are bordering the eastern provinces of Ukraine with Russia. But it will seriously degrade them, because this is a very safe route for the Russians. The Ukrainians don't yet have the capacity to be constantly hitting them here. Whereas if they start moving a lot of these men and supplies through the south of Ukraine, Ukraine has capabilities right now with HIMARS to still strike some of these key supply routes that Russia is using in Zaporizhia and Kherson and Donetsk, Luhansk. So I really hope that in 2024, this bridge will come down. So this is pretty much the update for today. I hope you enjoy my updates. There's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is a video that I saw today from 1420. And I highly recommend you guys to subscribe to his channel. This is, I believe, a young Russian man who's just interviewing Russian citizens in Russia. And this is a very powerful interview that he made with an old, elderly Russian woman who thankfully hasn't been fooled by Russia's propaganda, Putin's propaganda, and she sees things for what they are in Russia. And this is in the context of the 2024 elections, which will be in March. And we know who the winner is going to be, and she knows as well. So let me read out the captions. So again, go support 1420 channel if you want. So she says, basically, he's asking her about the elections, and she says, it cannot be called elections. It's a nonsense. What's your name? Vera Ivanovna. I want to tell you about a lady that was going to oppose Putin in the elections. And yes, that is actually another thing I forgot to mention, is that there was some lady, again, I don't know much about her, but she went to oppose, to be essentially the opposer for Putin in this 2024 election. And apparently the Russian election committee decided that she was not eligible to be, running for election. So again, this is just a show for Putin, but he needs to remove any options for the Russians. So this is to be expected, obviously. So I think he talks about this lady. Her name is Ekaterina Duntsova. She's a lawyer and a politician with experience. So she was disqualified from the elections because she made a paperwork mistake. Typical bureaucratic mistake. And then the lady is saying, why are you being such a baby? It's been going on for 20 years. So she is essentially saying that she's not surprised that this opposer got disqualified, and that Putin has been employing the same tactics for the last 20 years. What is the point of elections if it is already known that he will rule for another 6 years, evidently? Everyone already knows the result. Are people so idiotic, so slave-like? I don't understand why people tolerate this. Why do people think this is an election? How is it an election? And this is one of the main problems with Russia, is that they're apolitical society. They tolerate tsars or dictators like Stalin, like Putin, and many others, because that's all they've known. They've never really known what is democracy, what is living with these free world values that all of us understand here in the West. And the Russians simply haven't lived through that enough to understand and fight for it. Then she continues with, the results are in, the winners already known. Are the authorities really not letting the opposition into the elections? Gosh, it's so clear. Our people are just as dumb and as slavish as possible. People were serfs and now they're slaves. Why is there a war going on? Because the people are silent. It's true. I mean, again, apart from the first few days of the invasion in February 2022, where we saw a few thousand men and women in Russia that went to protest, this is completely out of the picture now. Most of them have either been arrested or left the country at this point, and the remaining Russians are the, as I said, apolitical Russians. So as she continues saying, our writer Pushkin said this 200 years ago, that the people are silent. He's a famous Russian poet. People will keep quiet and tolerate, and once the famine comes, they will still tolerate it. I'm no longer blaming Putin, but our people who allow themselves to be bullied. Of course, I mean, after 23 years of having a Putin, you have to start looking inside of your society. Why are people completely complacent with this? People are allowing it. Our people are completely stupid. People only want to eat, sleep, drink vodka, and have a car, and that's it. A scum. Russians are the greatest and the best. What the hell are they talking about? Disgusting people. The more I learn about this country, the more I hate it, says this lady. She's a Russian. Let me preface it again that this is a Russian being interviewed in Russia. So, and this is also an elderly woman. Typically, the more elderly the people are in Russia, the more brainwashed they are, the more they are inclined, most of them, to think that, well, whatever is going on right now is great. But thankfully, there's still some Russians that, are seeing through the BS. Tell me, what pluralism? Look at our TV programs. Solovyov. Have you seen pluralism there? There are such insolent people. They're being paid to deceive the population, to lie to them. Our nation is already insane and stupid, and they're dumbing it down even more. Just look at them. What the hell are they talking about? People die in a war. What is it? Is there any opposition in Russia at all? What do you mean? The opposition was nailed a long time ago. And it's true, I mean, in 2012 there was one last protest of opposition, but since then nothing happened. People are imprisoned for expressing their opinions. I'm not even talking about Navalny. So anyways, you guys get the idea. I just wanted to share with you this video because, again, it shows that not every single Russian person believes in this propaganda, believes in Putin, and they want him out. But unfortunately, she tells the truth that the majority of the Russians, unfortunately, will not rise. They will not rebel against this regime because that's all they've known. They have been brainwashed for decades, and they are just not able to see through all of this cloudiness that Putin has, built for them. It's either the West or it's another enemy, but don't look at us. We're not the problem, says Putin. But they are very much so the problem. And actually, one last thing before I end this video. Today, Poland came out with a warning mentioning that Russia could eventually attack within 3 years the Baltics. And we've already talked a little bit about that, but guys, don't ever, downplay these threats anymore. And this is another thing I want to mention. These Russians will support the invasion of the Baltics, right? This is an important glue. The glue for Russia is this great patriotic war, this patriotism that they have within their blood, always thinking that they're the best, that they're the strongest. And unfortunately, that is a lack of not only education, but lack of just seeing what the reality is in the free world. And so they will fully support this invasion of the Baltics. And I have no doubt that this could very well happen. Again, it's a question that could be, is very open. It could be maybe not, they're going to do it. But we need to assume all the time now that Russia always has bad intentions. And I think that we need to get prepared as well. The Baltics, Moldova, and other countries that are close to Russia with an eventual invasion. What does Putin have to lose at this point? Yes, he has lost thousands of men, hundreds of thousands of them, tanks, IFVs, airplanes, you name it. 20% of the Black Sea Fleet is now completely gone. But he has nothing to lose. He has turned Russia into a total war economy. So now these brainwashed Russians that this lady is talking about will be completely fine going to factories and building ammunition, going to die for Putin, going to die for Putin in other countries that they have no business in being in, including the Baltics. And we need to assume the worst at this point, and we need to be prepared because, again, maybe Russia's not going to be successful taking the Baltics, but they will try to rely on the unpreparedness of the West, like what we saw in Ukraine. This sort of in the beginning where nobody really believed in Ukraine, nobody was really offering true help to Ukraine. And this is what happened. Russia was able to pull off a rather good blitzkrieg in its first month of the campaign, is where most of its gains have been from, is this first month, 2 months in March and April of 2022. And they're going to try to recreate that in the Baltics, right? Try to eat as much land away. And then what are they going to do? They're going to build the Surovikin line, which, let's face it, has worked for the Russians in really fending off the Ukrainian attacks in the south during, the summer campaign. So this Surovikin line, full of millions of mines, trenches, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, trash, has really worked for the Russians. And I have no doubt that they're going to try to pull off a similar situation in the Baltics. That is, trying to storm and get within, the areas that they can get into, obviously. And if they can't capture the entirety of Latvia or Estonia, you're going to start building this Surovikin line and hoping that eventually for concession, for a peace treaty, like what we saw with Minsk 1, Minsk 2, back in 2014, 2015 in Ukraine. And then they're going to rearm themselves, send more men, and continue on grinding and eating away, chipping away as much as possible. That's what Russia's all about right now. So, that's my 5 cents today for in regards to the Russian population, the brainwashing that is ongoing, and why we cannot discount that, why we cannot underestimate the Russians. Even if they've lost so much in Ukraine right now, they're going to be okay with losing the same amount in the Baltics, in Finland, in Moldova, if they have to, if their Tsar tells them to do that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Again, a huge thank you for your support. I am very thankful for all of you. And please, if you enjoy my channel, subscribe to it. If you like this video, please like it, leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!